And that resistance to change is likely costing you a lot of great leads, a lot of great opportunities, a lot of great clients, and a lot of great revenue. But it requires a shift in mindset, a shift in perspective, to instead of being seen by your traditional job titles, to instead show up and look a lot more like a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, perhaps even a thought leader when it comes to anything and everything related to who that buyer persona is, what their biggest goals are, what their biggest challenges are, and inserting yourself into their professional development, their learning and development process, and doing it in such a way that's so valuable that they want to bring their coworkers with them. Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. And I want to very cordially welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem. Regardless of whether you are with a data center operator like a hyperscale or colocation or edge or wholesale or modular data center provider, or maybe you're part of a data center technology or data center facilities related company, or perhaps you do something related to your company, does something related to data center construction, real estate, or investment, or maybe your company does something in and around outsourced sales and marketing in and around data centers, critical infrastructure, and digital. Regardless of what your role is, perhaps you work in sales like as an account executive, SDR, a BDR, like a sales development rep, a business development rep, or an account executive, or maybe post-sales like as an account manager or client success, customer success, or perhaps you work in product or channel partnerships, or maybe you're the executive sponsor, the leader who's responsible for recruiting the right people, getting people in the right places, on the right teams, and making sure that there is amazing collaboration to position your individuals, your teams, your company for growth in this amazing time within the data center ecosystem. If this is the first time you're joining us for Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, welcome. If you have been with us before, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us. So if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter. You can sign up for free, subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. And that way you'll get the newsletter delivered to your email inbox on Sundays. So what is on the agenda for this week? We're first going to talk about colocation, in particular, how colocation data center providers can drive lead generation. After that, we'll turn our attention to how you can reach operations and infrastructure management decision makers, in particular, how to identify data center operations and infrastructure management decision makers. After that, we'll talk about how to gain edge data center clients in distributed markets. Then we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And after that, we'll dive into 3 more big sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, including how a colocation and cloud services provider attracts the right channel partners. So if your company has an indirect playbook in addition to its own direct sales team, you'll for sure want to listen in on advice around attracting the right channel partners. After that, we'll talk about how a high-performance data center cabling solutions company, can improve its lead generation. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll look at how a data center investment and financial advisory firm can attract tenants. So without any further delay, let's jump into this week's first question. First up is, how does a colocation data center provider drive lead generation? How do colocation data center providers drive lead generation? That is a fantastic question. And in order to know which leads are a great fit for your company, we need to review the basics. For starters, we need to know where you've been most successful with your colocation business. What kinds of clients are a great fit for placing their servers in your facility? And the way we'll usually figure that out is we'll look at your website and we'll look at the logos, we'll look at the reviews, the testimonials, the case study pages, and we're looking for what these companies, what these individuals have in common. If we're not able to see that information public facing on your digital doorstep, the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is to go into your CRM system, your customer relationship management system, and try to figure out which clients generate the most revenue and the most profit for your company in descending order. And if this isn't in your CRM, it's for sure in your accounting or your ERP. So maybe it's not just a question for your sales director, maybe it's a question for your finance director as well. Where does most of the revenue, where does most of the profit come from? Which the strongest unit economics? And maybe you talk even to your client success, your account managers, and you figure out which clients are the happiest, have the highest net promoter score, which have the best land and expand potential for upselling and cross-selling. All of that gets factored into figuring out where you do best. And once we know the answers to those questions, then we can make sure that our lead generation strategy is well thought out. So first we need to know, where do we want these leads to be coming from at the company level, at the account level? So we need to know, where are these leads, where are these clients located? Can we sell colocation to everywhere on the planet? Or are we looking for within a certain region of the world? Are we looking for a certain country? Are we looking for a certain region within the country? All of these are super important with making sure that you're generating the right leads. For a lot of colocation operators, it's very common to find that you'll have a go-to-market, a sales and marketing strategy that's designed for local clients, what I call hyperlocal clients. Those are the clients, the leads that could potentially drive to your facility pretty easily. They're located within a maybe 30 or 60-minute drive of where your facility or facilities are located. And then there's a long distance playbook that uses digital, that uses a lot of video content, that uses webinars, live streams. And for that, you may be selling colocation all over your country, to a group of countries, all over your continent, perhaps globally. And when we think about how colocation often checks off quite a few boxes when it comes to getting specific about a precise location, if there's like edge and latency requirements, or sometimes you're checking off a box for geographic locations because of governance issues, meaning that the servers need to be in a certain country, then, or state or province, all of those factor into that. Maybe you do need two different lead generation strategies and playbooks. One that's concentrated on clients and potential clients who are located really nearby to your facility, and the others that could potentially be anywhere on the planet. Again, only you can answer that based on where you've achieved product and sustained product market fit in the past. But that's definitely something to be thinking about as you put together the geographic part of your ideal client profile. In addition to geography, when it comes to ideal clients and lead generation, what company sizes are a really good fit for you? Not company sizes in terms of how much power they need from you, or how many units of space or racks or cabinets that they need from you. We're talking at a much more pragmatic level when it comes to lead generation and prospecting, how big or how small their companies are. In other words, when you look at where you've been most successful in both the public facing and probably in your CRM as well, what do they have in common? Not only where they're located, but how big or how small their companies are. So from a product management sales leadership perspective, you likely have a certain minimum level of purchase, minimum level of commitment, minimum amount of space, minimum financial value that every one of your colocation clients, every one of your colocation tenants needs to be able to hit to be worth your while. You know your minimums. And with that in mind, how big does a certain company need to be, other things being equal on average, for them to be able to afford your minimums? Along the same line, at the other extreme, if you happen to work for a huge global data center operator, there likely is no ceiling to the size of clients that you can work with. However, If your company is more mid-size, or especially if it's smaller, there may be an upper limit as to what clients are a good fit for you. At what point, like, does a Fortune 500 company show up and their financial requirements, their compliance requirements, their legal requirements, sales cycle requirements, the amount of people in different roles, all of these things may get to the point where you come to the conclusion that a company beyond 10,000 employees or beyond 50,000 employees or something like that may have requirements that your company just can't satisfy right now with your existing colocation resources. So that's what you want to be thinking about when you're documenting your ideal client profile as part of your lead generation strategy. One is where these future clients are located, and second, how big or how small their companies are. And then a third place that a lot of people don't think about often enough when it comes to their lead gen strategy, when it comes to their go-to-market, is what industries that you've done really well within and what industries have you really struggled within. Because especially for a colocation data center operator, depending on where you're located, there are for sure industries that are very highly regulated that as a result require that you have certain compliance, accreditation, certifications to be able to have their servers in your facility. In most places around the world, industries like healthcare and financial services and education and government tend to be really, really highly regulated, and as a result tend to have specific requirements that they have for their data center operators. And there's other industries that are less regulated. So depending on your capabilities, depending on your credentialing, there may be certain industries that are a fantastic fit that you would want to explicitly include. And there may be industries that are a terrible fit because you're going to get knocked out really early on in the sales process. So those are your inclusions and exclusions that you'd have in your ideal client profile as part of your lead gen strategy. So that's the company side, or what's often known as the account side of lead generation for a colocation facility. Now, once you have that built out, you should be able to compile a target account list. And that usually is something that you're going to build before you start to divvy out named accounts to people on your team, regardless of whether you're talking about early stages of the cycle, like for your SDRs and your BDRs, or later stages of the cycle, like account executives, or really late stages of the sales cycle, you're like post-sales, your account managers. You typically will have a list of accounts that you're going after, and you say, okay, based on territory, company size, capacity, whatever, you decide to divvy those up. So you have your ideal client profile, you have your target account list, and then within these accounts, who are the stakeholders that matter most that we need to be building these relationships with? Who's the most important economic stakeholder that influences this colocation purchase decision? Who's the second most important kind of stakeholder? In larger companies, it's quite common to find a third or even a fourth important kind of stakeholder, and you'll want to rank them in priority order. Like the most important will be your primary buyer persona. The second most important will be your secondary buyer persona. Maybe there's a tertiary buyer persona. And within each of these segments, we need to know what is going on in their worlds. What do they think about? What are they worried about? What are their biggest goals that they're trying to achieve in their job, individually, as a team, and as a company, that are either directly or indirectly related to digital infrastructure and colocation? And what are they struggling with most? What's their biggest source of frustration? What are they challenged with most when it comes to IT infrastructure, when it comes to something that's a leading indicator that they're going to be in the market for colocation in the coming weeks or in the coming months? Now, colocation has some unique challenges as well, because a lot of times people, when they sign up for colocation, are committing to like a 24-month or a 36-month contract. And no matter how dissatisfied that prospect is, that potential client is with their current provider, it's going to take a lot for them to head for the exits early when they're, say, in month 4 of a 36-month contract. There are scenarios all the time that happen where people are so fed up that they're negotiating an earlier exit or whatever like that, because there's been so many covenants that have been completely ignored, destroyed expectations, the financial hemorrhage of downtime, a host of issues. But at the end of the day, we need to be cognizant that there can be either a relatively short cycle or a relatively long cycle. However, what's most important is we figure out a way to get you and your team members in there early and often. Why is early and often so important? Because we now live in a world where so much of this buyer's journey now happens without you in the room. Like 10 years ago, if you were a BDR, an SDR, an account executive, an account manager for a co-location data center, most of your prospects and clients would do about half of their research on their own. Then they'd get roughly to that halfway point, like 56% of the way through their buyer's journey. They'd be like, okay, now I'm ready to talk to a salesperson. However, that's now very much in the distant rearview mirror, like a nostalgic point of like, hey, remember back when people valued sales professionals a lot more than they do today. So it's not so much that they don't value salespeople. It's just that now the preferences are such that they do so much more research on their own that it's not 56% over before you meet a prospect. It's now 83% from Gartner. Gartner latest research showing 83% of a typical journey, researching, evaluating pricing, comparing options now happens before vendor contact, before sales contact. So even if you do everything perfect, you're only in there for the final 17% if you keep doing things the way you've always been doing them. However, you don't need to keep doing things the way you've always been doing them. It's inertia. And that resistance to change is likely costing you a lot of great leads, a lot of great opportunities, a lot of great clients, and a lot of great revenue. But it requires a shift in mindset, a shift in perspective to, instead of being seen by your traditional job titles, to instead show up and look a lot more like a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, perhaps even a thought leader when it comes to anything and everything related to who that buyer persona is, what their biggest goals are, what their biggest challenges are, and inserting yourself into their professional development, their learning and development process, and doing it in such a way that's so valuable that they want to bring their coworkers with them. This is best executed most often through events marketing. It can be offline events, which if people are located nearby your facility, works great in the form of like breakfast seminars and lunch and learns. And you don't need a lot of budget. You don't even need a lot of space to do this. If you have a conference room that comfortably sits 15 people, you're off to the races. Just take segment by segment, and each week or twice a month, or at the minimum, at least once a month, invite all of the CTOs of mid-market manufacturing companies in your areas to come in to learn about best practices for mid-market manufacturing IT executives to think about when it comes to picking the right digital infrastructure provider. And you'd have like your CTO as the featured speaker, and they would give some really good educational content value, talking for 30 or 40 minutes. Before that, there's a little bit of informal networking and some breakfast or lunch. They talk for 30 or 45 minutes. Your internal or external subject matter expert, whoever's the featured speaker for that, answers questions for 10 or 15 minutes. Then you take everyone around your facility on a tour and lather, rinse, and repeat. You're nearly guaranteed when you do that over and over again at a level where you're sharing generous, helpful information that can help them with their career, you will build great leads. You will build great sales opportunities. And you will notice over time when you ask them, gee, when it comes to picking the right IT infrastructure provider for a mid-market manufacturing company, it takes a village. There's typically people involved from operations, infrastructure, engineering, support, compliance, finance, whatever. So with that in mind, who else would benefit from attending? And you start to notice this is working when you see 2, 3, 4 stakeholders from the same company all showing up together. Teams that learn together, grow together. And what you're doing is you're not only guaranteeing that you're on the short list and staying on the short list, you're proactively driving alignment in the early and the middle stages of the journey. So by the time they're finally ready to look at where they're going to go for co-location, you've already got the know, like, and trust nailed. You've already educated and built trust with them. Now, if they're located locally, great. If not, this can also be done long distance in webinars. Might be tough to send the bagel and the cream cheese and the coffee through the Zoom, but you can do the next best thing. You can still share helpful educational content that helps them do their job better. Segment by segment. Don't try to throw everyone into the same generalist bucket. If you have deep expertise in manufacturing and telecommunications, do a separate series for each. If you also do really well with channel partners, do a separate series for managed service providers and integrators and master agents and who else you'd have in kind of that channel partner ecosystem. But that's the basic approach that I'd use for how co-location data center providers can drive better lead generation from a tactical perspective? Yeah, for sure. You need landing pages and email marketing to support it, and you need good targeted lists and everything. But if you're crystal clear on your ideal client profile and you're crystal clear on your buyer personas and what they care about in their own words, you simply take each of those goals, each of those challenges in their own words, and each one of those goals and each one of those challenges is the title for one of your events, online and offline. From a best practices perspective, record them all. Record it regardless of whether it's in person or on digital, like a virtual event, because for however many people attended live, there's always at least 10 times, 100 times, potentially 1,000 times more people who should have been there that are on your list, that are coworkers, people that joined those companies later who would benefit tremendously from watching the same content. And of course, you can chop it up in pieces and repurpose sections of it and do shorts and repurpose into blogs and ebooks and social posts and everything like that. But at the end of the day, educate and build trust. That's the key unlock with all of this for how a colocation data center provider can drive lead generation. Be intentional about who you're doing this for, what they care about, and educate and build trust. Lather, rinse, repeat over and over. Okay, next question. What do we have up? How do we identify data center operations and infrastructure management decision makers? How do we identify data center operations and infrastructure management decision makers? That's a fantastic question. And there's a couple mindset issues that I want to start with. A lot of people come to us and they still believe that a lot of their best deals come down to one decision maker. And while that's true, in most cases, there is one person who ultimately is the one who greenlights the project. It is extremely unusual that the decision maker is going to go ahead with this initiative without getting consensus among the teams that report to that decision maker. In other words, even if the CTO who's going to sign off on your particular project, or the VP of infrastructure, or engineering, or real estate, or CEO, or whoever it is that you have this personal connection with, because it's your brother-in-law. The nepotism is potentially a whole separate issue, but let's say it was a warm introduction. Maybe the decision maker is the parent of one of your kids' friends, or maybe it is the spouse of one of your kids' teachers, or maybe it's a neighbor, the next door neighbor of one of your cousins or something like that. It's a pretty warm connection. Even that notwithstanding, people have gotten so risk averse now that even if you manage to get that magic introduction, that person is almost certainly going to send you back to their team to build consensus first. So this whole idea of decision maker being a singular person is largely out the window. It's now a decision-making committee. So once we know that, it's more important than ever that as we stay with these buyers, as we stay with these future clients throughout the full journey, that we have a pretty big tent, a pretty big umbrella that we're inviting them under to be with us throughout this full journey. And the earlier that we get in and the more of the right people that are going along with us on this journey, the better off we're going to be. Because we now live in a world now where most technology and facilities and construction and real estate, most stakeholders in this ecosystem now want to do a ton of research on their own before they speak with someone from your sales team. It wasn't always quite like this. It used to be that a typical prospect would spend about half of their research and decision-making process completely on their own, and they'd spend the second half of it with sales professionals from various companies that they were thinking of working with at the time. And that was like 10 years ago, back when people were still reasonably comfortable with social media and search engines and mobile devices. We've now gotten to the point where over the past 10 years, that 10 additional years of digital transformation, millions of baby boomers retiring, more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles, tens of millions of people working from home at the beginning of the 2020s, accelerating digital transformation. All of this has added up to the point now most of their research and decision-making process now happens without you in the room. And the only way we're getting back into the room is we can no longer show up as a account executive or a sales development or business development rep or a vendor. We need to show up as an educator, a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor. Because regardless of whether we're talking about data center operations professionals or data center infrastructure management professionals or decision makers, they all need to keep their skills sharp. If they don't keep their skills sharp, within a matter of years, they become dinosaurs and they find themselves struggling to stay gainfully employed in this industry. They all need to keep their skills sharp. So how do we show up in a way so that your client-facing team members become part of their learning development, become part of their professional development, part of their reskilling, their upskilling, their cross-skilling, their cross-training internally to help them keep their skills sharp? The way we do that is we take the time to get really specific about what kinds of companies these operations and infrastructure management executives work for. So we know geographically where they're located, how big or how small their companies are, what industries they tend to work within. And then we study the heck out of these individuals to get strong customer insight, strong buyer persona research. So we know in their own words, what's going on, what's top of mind for them, what do they need to achieve professionally, what's sitting in their objectives and key results, what's in their job descriptions, whatever they need to achieve individually, on their team and as their company, when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center operations or data center infrastructure management. That's what they're trying to achieve in the short term and in the intermediate term and the long term professionally. But we also know that they have struggles, they have challenges, they have a lot of areas that are frustrating the heck out of them when it comes to data center ops, when it comes to data center infrastructure management. So when we know those challenges in their own words, and we know the consensus on which tend to pop up most often, those goals and those challenges give us a framework to build our entire education and trust building strategy around, our entire approach to showing up and looking a lot more like a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, and a trusted advisor. This changes the nature of who you hire. This changes the nature of how you invest in upskilling and reskilling your existing team members. It changes the nature of how they spend their time, because the goal is, if you can get your future clients, your prospects, to spend a significant amount of their learning development and professional development time and energy learning from your client-facing team members, it can have a massively transformative impact on educating and building trust with those prospects and clients at a time when they're actually open to learning, open to new ideas, and open to how you frame how they should look at their entire category, shaping the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the options that are in front of them. And when you not only get in early, because you understand what the leading indicator is of someone needing data center operations or data center infrastructure management expertise a few weeks to a few months before they actually are in market, ready for that purchase decision, by getting in early and getting in often, we have the same people continuing to show up, continuing to learn from you, and they start to bring their coworkers along with them. This is the key twist with all of this, because yeah, for sure, you can go into LinkedIn Sales Navigator and there's a handy dandy link where you can click on decision makers in a company. And sure, you can use that. And to a certain degree, that helps. LinkedIn is doing some inferential stuff there. But unless you have the luxury of working for a blue chip brand in this space, like you work for a Fortune 1000 company where when you tell people where you work, you never have to explain what that company does. Everyone, kind of has an idea in this industry of what like Equinix does and what Digital Realty does and what HPE does and what Google does. If you work for a much smaller company, like a mid-sized company or a small business, your brand no longer is just limited to your fonts and your hexadecimal colors and your logos. Your brand is now everything that the marketplace says about you when you're not in the room. And given that you're really not in the room for much of that research and decision-making process anymore, it's incumbent on you and your team members to show up more as educators and teachers and consultants and trusted advisors more than ever before. And in order for us to provide value and to motivate those folks to not only want to attend, but bring their coworkers and potentially bring their boss with them. We need to deliver a ton of value, so much value that when you compare what you're going to talk about in your 30-minute or 60-minute webinar or breakfast seminar, or whatever, that you're confident that it's at least as good as a session that they would have chose to attend at a major conference that they traveled to at significant time and expense. It's so good that you're extremely confident that they're blown away, that you get fantastic scores on the feedback survey, and that next time around when you invite them to an event, they're bringing even more of their coworkers and bringing their boss with them. That's how you get to know who's on the decision committee when it comes to your category. Because when you say, hey, I see that you're registered for our upcoming webinar, our upcoming lunch and learn event, whatever the title is, but we know it takes a village. There's typically, when it comes to operations, infrastructure management, there's engineers, there's support, there's compliance, there's cybersecurity. So given all of this, who else would benefit from attending? And you'll start to see it working when you look at the registration list. You'll see it working even more when you see who attends. And that's when the magic starts to happen. That's when you're driving alignment across the full decision committee. And you start to figure out actually who is on the decision committee. You're meeting them early and often, where you have a position to dramatically shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the options in front of them. So that's my insights. That's my advice on how, in a hyper competitive world that runs 7/24, 365, where you have your direct and indirect competitors and non-business model competitors, and people are just looking for answers on their own constantly, how we earn our way back in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So your prospects and clients, your future clients, see your client-facing team members as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center operations and data center infrastructure management. Next question, what do we got? So our next question is all about edge. And as we move into a world that's increasingly driven by AI and electric vehicles and IoT, and in the near future, smart cities, edge with extremely precise locations and extremely low latency becomes even more important than ever. In a lot of ways, some of the recently built colocation facilities that may not be able to meet power requirements may even end up being repurposed for edge reasons with more conventional workloads. But so this question is all about, how can we gain edge data center clients in distributed markets? How can a company that's principally in the business of being an edge data center operator, how do we gain edge data center clients in distributed markets? That is a fantastic question. Because the reality is, if you are a small to mid-size colocation data center operator, you may have, for example, 6 facilities or something like that. And depending on how closely geographically clustered they are, all 6 of those may be in the same general region, or they may be scattered all over the country or potentially all over the world. And depending on how closely versus not closely clustered those locations are, you may potentially need 6 different sales and marketing playbooks that are hyper local to that particular location. The mid-size and large data center operators in this space that have dozens or more than 100 locations, and we know it's a relatively short list of anyone that's operating at that size, has formalized and really built out tremendous best practices around field marketing to be able to execute this at scale. But even a relatively small company, so the concept of distributed markets is a pretty big deal. And where this becomes practical to execute, even for a relatively small team, is, let's say, for example, you're an edge data center provider and you have 12 locations in 12 different geographic markets scattered throughout your country, or a group of 2, 3, 4 countries or something like that. So when we're building out your ideal client profile, we're going to name those locations, and we're going to figure out how big or how small our ideal clients are based on historically the kind of deals that we've won. We're going to figure out if there's certain industries that are a better fit than others. But we largely need to run a pretty similar playbook to what we would if we were marketing and selling colo. In other words, there is a playbook for clients potential clients, prospects that are located pretty close to your edge location. And there's a playbook for those that are not, where you'd run it digitally, where you'd run it virtually, where you'd run it long distance. Because the goal with all of this is if they're located near one of your edge locations, we want FaceTime with that person, but we don't just want FaceTime in the context of socializing with them. This is where I think a lot of people get off track in some of their growth investments. And yeah, it's nice to have 50 people show up and buying a round of drinks or taking people to play golf or taking people to a ball game. But like at the end of the day, the goal is to educate and build trust. And while brand awareness and affinity does sometimes help a little bit for us to really move the needle on people making changes in their beliefs and motivating multiple stakeholders in that company to all take action in the same direction, we need to do a lot of education and we need to do a lot of trust building. And because of that, educational events where prospects and future clients are coming to you and learning from your internal subject matter experts are incredibly impactful and incredibly important to cut through the noise. So in these distributed markets, let's say we have 12 locations, it may not be practical to have an event in every location every month, or maybe not even every quarter, but depending on what your resources are in that location, what you could potentially do is after you've documented your ideal client profile and you've figured out across those 12 locations, not only what they have in common geographically and by company size and by industry, but who the most influential stakeholders are in those kinds of companies that have impacted your deals the most in the essentially what's showing up in the logos, what's showing up in the case studies, what's showing up in your CRM with the happiest clients for your edge. And when you know that, you'll start to figure out, okay, maybe it's a director of data center operations or an infrastructure executive or a telecommunications executive or a channel partner. Like figure out what are the two most important segments within those companies, the two most important categories of people within those companies that have the biggest impact on where they choose to make their edge investment. And once you know that, figure out what's going on in their world, their biggest goals and challenges. And then let's say for argument's sake, you have 6 goals that you know about that segment has, and they have 6 big frustrations, 6 big challenges that you know that particular segment has. So with 6 goals and 6 challenges, that lines up to an even 12 topics that we could cover once a month in a lunch and learn series and a breakfast seminar series and a webinar series for that particular segment. And the key with this to cut through the noise is to be really specific about personalizing and tailoring that content to what that specific segment cares most about. And the title of that event, in their own words, not what you think the words are, but what their words actually are, because you took the time to do your homework and do your research with all of that. So distributed markets. So if you have determined that it's largely the same kinds of decision makers, it's largely the same primary and secondary stakeholder, regardless of which of these 12 markets they're in, then essentially you're going to create a webinar kit. And that webinar kit you can repurpose into an offline event kit. Now, obviously, all 12 of those segments, assuming that the time zones are relatively close by, you can run the webinar for all 12 of these distributed markets, basically on the same webinar. If you have enough people in individual segments and it's just not practical for them to visit locally, yeah, you could look at running a more granular webinar strategy. But it's only when it comes to having offline events where they can drive public transportation, whatever it is, they're 30 to 60 minutes away from your facility and you have a small classroom or foyer or conference room or something that can accommodate 15, 20 people or however many capacity you're looking for this particular event. They come in, have a little breakfast, have some coffee, have some lunch. You teach something really valuable that'll help them do their job better for 30 or 45 minutes. You answer questions, you give them a little tour around your edge facility, and you've built rapport. Now, in terms of your distributed markets, you're building essentially a kit so that your field sales team that's in place, your field account executives, your field account managers, whoever is the feet on the ground in that particular location, will essentially run the event kit in that place and use that with that particular segment to educate and build trust and marketing, basically get the right people to show up so you can know, like, and trust building essentially know, like, and trust with multiple stakeholders from that company. So that's how it would approach all of this, is get really clear at the company level what they have in common. From there, you can build out your target account list. You're almost certainly going to want to segment that target account list by location. So when it comes to inviting these folks to offline events, you're inviting them to the location that's most relevant for them. If the value of these edge deals is large enough, in addition to using outbound, you probably want to use ads. I'm a huge fan of using LinkedIn Campaign Manager to push ads to the perfect people and the perfect size companies for this particular context. And the goal is to get the right people register for a free event. Recognize that it's very rare that you're going to get 100% attendance rate. Usually a more typical attendance rate is in that 25-50% spot. So plan accordingly, record and use this content for both virtual events, use it for offline events. And this is how I would approach gaining edge data center clients in distributed markets: is be the educator, be the teacher, be the trusted advisor, get out of the vendor box as quickly as possible, and use this as a way to potentially be able to compete with the companies that are even significantly larger than you, because at the end of the day, they're buying the relationship they have with your individual people in that particular location. And again, they want to learn from subject matter experts. If your account executive has deep enough expertise where they can run an event like that as the lead speaker, great. If not, they're the person who's doing all the coordination, checking people in, kind of like the event moderator, and you're bringing in an internal subject matter expert. Maybe it's an external subject matter expert. Maybe there's channel partners in each of these distributed markets, and you're bringing them in, or a consultant that you work with, or something like that. At the end of the day, it's all about providing value, educational value, so that they're highly motivated. These prospects and clients are highly motivated to not only want to spend time with you, but the content, the educational events, the experience is so good, so valuable, so useful, that they're motivated to want to bring their coworkers, maybe even bring their boss along with them. That's how you can gain edge data center clients in distributed, even very, very competitive marketplaces. Is recognize that we live in a world now where people are more sales allergic than they've ever been. And the way we earn our way in early and often is to reposition our client-facing team members so that they're seen as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything that's directly or indirectly related to their decision about what they're going to ultimately do with renting, leasing, whatever you want to call it, space within one of your edge data center facilities. So that's how I would approach that overall area. It definitely has some things in common with a colocation playbook, and it definitely has some things that diverge a little bit. But at the end of the day, we want the right prospects to spend more quality face time with you in a way where your knowledge transfer, learning and development, professional development, because when they see that, you build a deep emotional bond with them, and you're in a position to really shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options that are in front of them early enough for it to really matter. So that's how I would approach how an edge data center client, how to gain edge data center clients in distributed markets. We're going to tackle 3 more questions in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. But before we do that, if you're getting good value from this week's show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word, share the love. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming episode, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform you're watching. We're going to take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor, and then we'll be back with 3 more of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming events and educational resources just like this, make sure you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter. And if you have an idea for a topic, a question, or challenge that we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments. So what's up next? The next question that we'll be tackling this week is, how does a colocation and cloud services provider attract the right channel partners? How does a colocation and cloud services provider attract the right channel partners? This is a fantastic question. And it's one that I see people struggling with unnecessarily. And it's a lot of the reason I think they're struggling with this is their expectations are just not aligned with reality. Channel partners can be a really, really fantastic way for you to scale the growth of a colocation or cloud services business. However, and the great part with it is it's not just about shifting like fixed overhead to variable overhead. It's not just about having more flexibility. It's really about you being able to tap into markets that are just not practical or cost effective for you to tap into any other way. All these nooks and crannies of highly fragmented markets, especially with SMB, but even in mid-market and enterprise to a certain degree. I did work with Microsoft's channel partner program fairly early on in my career, and I've worked with a lot of other IT infrastructure companies over the years on similar kind of channel partner enablement initiatives. And when you approach this with the right mindset, you should be thinking about, okay, if you know your average tenure for how long a employee stays with your company is X, and when you drill into that and you look at the specifics for how long someone stays in a marketing role or a sales role or a support role or professional services role, you know what that information is. The reality is, no matter how fantastic of a job you're doing with employee retention, it's very possible that your channel partners could end up staying with you for considerably longer than that. I think a big part of the reason why companies like Microsoft and Cisco have endured over the decades is they've done a remarkable job with building an incredibly loyal ecosystem of certified individuals and certified partners. The reality is, like, from the perspective of a like MCSE or CCIE or something like that, when you're learning the curriculum and you're getting certified on that curriculum, you essentially become an extension of that company, evangelizing the value of their platform to your coworkers, to your boss, and to your clients. And when that happens at a company level where there's multiple stakeholders or several stakeholders that have all invested in similar kinds of individual certifications and getting certified at the company level, it grows even considerably more. The challenge is, a lot of people look at the Disney version of this and they understand how the top 20, top 50, top 100 channel partner programs have achieved what they have, but they have a hard time translating that and contextualizing it down to a smaller company that doesn't have that blue chip branding. And I think a lot of it is recognizing that in many ways, your channel partner that you're looking to recruit, that you're looking to attract to your company, is another segment. It's another buyer persona. It's another go-to-market with its own unique needs that are quite different than the buyer personas that your direct sales team looks to attract and engage and close sales with. So, for example, like a colocation and a cloud services provider, maybe they've historically done really well selling into the mid-market, like companies that have, say, I don't know, 250 to 5,000 employees. And they've done really well in healthcare and financial services. And in these mid-market, mid-sized companies in healthcare and financial services, they know the 2 or 3 different kinds of stakeholders that typically are really all in on the early and the middle and the late stages of the journey, and are really heavily involved post-purchase as well. So they've gotten product market fit. And they've gotten go-to-market fit because as they continue to add more resources to growing their sales team, hiring more account executives, sales development reps, more account managers, they know they can continue to grow capacity, grow their pipeline, grow territories, and everything continues to work. Their sales process is proven. What they don't know at that point is, when you're looking to do this with channel partners, you can for sure use some of what you've learned with your direct sales force and your own marketing and your own account management best practices. But now this needs to be repackaged in a way that works with companies and individuals who, instead of working for your company 40, 50, 60 hours a week, you're fighting to get their attention for an hour or two here and there once in a while. Because while your SDRs and account managers and account executives and your marketers and your product managers, they're concentrating 100% of their energy on doing their job for you, a channel partner, and the smaller they are, the more hats the individual people are working, may be actively involved in 10 or 20 different channel partner programs. So even in the portion of their week, even in the portion of their month where they're actively looking for new channel partnerships, or they're actively looking to upskill based on their existing channel partnerships, let's say for argument's sake, they devote every Thursday to that, 20% of their job, but they're taking that 20% pie and they're dividing it up among 20 different channel partner programs that they're actively engaged in. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, cool. Like you find out this person actively works on things having to do with their channel partner ecosystem relationships on Thursdays. You're like, oh, cool. I could potentially get 8 hours with them in a given week. No, it's 8 hours divided by 20. So what is that? 480 minutes and divided into 20 slices. And you start to see like what you're really dealing with trying to have a productive conversation with them and getting them to work on not only upskilling, but working on a marketing and sales strategy, executing a go-to-market playbook, upskilling, reskilling all of their internal resources. So it takes time. And in many cases, when you're talking about smaller channel partners where it's not cost effective for you to have a very intense relationship with a channel account manager and an individual channel partner, you're largely going to use a lot of one-to-many resources. And these one-to-many resources look a lot like the kind of one-to-many resources that you would develop for your core direct buyer personas, your prioritized buyer personas. So like, for example, we were talking about the mid-market financial services, the mid-market healthcare company, and maybe there's an IT executive and maybe there's an infrastructure engineer or something like that. And for each of those segments over time, you study that persona, you figure out their biggest goals and challenges, and you're creating downloadable content and website tools and video content and podcasts and webinars and email newsletters and all of that. What the infrastructure executive cares about is different than the CTO. And what the channel partner cares about is completely different than those other two segments. So once you do your tertiary buyer persona, or however you want to rank them for your channel partner, and you discover their 5 or 10 biggest goals that are directly or indirectly related to what you do, and their 5 or 10 biggest challenges, then okay, great. Now you need a marketing and sales strategy to educate and build trust with their channel partners throughout the full journey. And just like with end customers, we need to get in there early and often. This is, again, where I see a lot of unrealistic expectations with, well, we got a booth at the show. For sure, they're all going to sign up and be onboarded and excited to jump on board as an extension of our channel partner team. They might be, but you may also find that they can only work on channel partnerships one day a week, and there's 20 active partnerships that they're juggling at any given time. So in order for you to earn your way in and disproportionately grab share from someone else, you got to deliver a lot of value, and value that helps them do their job better. And it can't be so value where you're trying to recycle what you know about IT infrastructure engineers and CTOs into a package that could be interesting to a channel partner. No, we need to know what's going on in their world. And here's where it gets where there's more opportunity, and here's where it gets even potentially trickier. Not all channel partners are the same, which is why you see over time, bigger channel programs will ultimately segment. They'll have a channel partner program for managed service providers and integrators. They might have a separate one for consultants who don't transact. They may have a separate one for like master agents that are more telecommunications focused. Again, it's in the same way your prospects and clients are different. There's even different categories of channel partners that need a different comp plan and need different educational resources. But if this is your first foray into doing this, you can make it a huge dent just by recognizing that channel partners care about different things than your primary and secondary direct buyer personas will care about. And by having their own downloadable lead generation premium content on your website, having a separate blog for them, a separate podcast for them, separate webinars for them, a separate email newsletter for them, for sure a separate event strategy for them, you can make a big dent in attracting and engaging and building the right channel partner relationships. Now, just like with SaaS, just like with cloud services, getting that channel partner signed up is really just another starting line, right? And now we need to get them excited and enabled about executing a go-to-market strategy, marketing and lead generation and lead nurturing and deal creation among their existing client base. And for sure, your channel account managers can help them execute some of that, but recognize that them signing on as a channel partner with your company is really just another starting line. In the same way that a cloud services client or a colocation client, again, there's a lot of fake outs where people think they closed the deal. The reality is, yeah, you got to a new starting line, and now you do the real work of trying to get them excited and enabled with growing that relationship among their client base, what we often call selling to versus selling through. And selling through basically is where your channel partners, and again, it's not the company, these are individuals within these companies. So when you get really good at this, you'll start to figure out like who are the right people at these integrators, at these consulting firms, at these MSPs, at these VARs, at these master agents, who are the right people that you want to be building relationships with that are going to be heavily involved in co-marketing, co-selling, co-servicing, that's uniquely aligned with your mutual prospects, with your mutual clients that you're working on with them. So these are all the considerations when it comes to attracting the right channel partners that I want you to be thinking about if you're serious about making this a big part of your growth strategy. So that's a quick kind of crash course here on how a co-location and cloud services provider can attract the right channel partners. Is make sure that you treat your channel partners as a separate segment, distinctly different with its own unique needs, its own unique goals and challenges relative to your other one or two or whatever, however many buyer personas you have with your direct sales team. And second, recognize that just getting a channel partner signed up is just another starting line. And again, in most cases, unless they're huge companies, you need to work efficiently with one-to-many resources. So on-demand video libraries, knowledge bases, email newsletters, webinars, in-person type of events with one and many become incredibly important to be able to do this profitably at scale. The social proof elements too of getting channel partners to meet some of your other existing channel partners that have been successful with your company is also incredibly important. So if you think about like product market fit and go-to-market fit, there's also channel partner market fit, channel market fit, partner market fit, whatever you want to call it, where you have enough, where you've done enough reps that you know exactly the kind of channel partner that's going to be most successful with your firm. You know how big or small their company is, where they're located, what industries, what verticals they tend to focus on, what their business model is, and you have a strong sense of who has been involved historically from that account, what their particular job role is. And then you can take those learnings and not only use it to build a go-to-market strategy for growing your channel partner program, you can use a lot of those relationships and success stories to help cross-pollinate all of your new potential channel partners and newly onboarded channel partners. So that's how I would approach how a co-location and cloud services provider can attract the right channel partners, recognizing that the right channel partners for you may be completely different than the right channel partners for a different kind of company. It's going to vary tremendously depending on the nature of your business model, how big or small your companies are, your resources are, where you've won best, and the kinds of channel partners that ultimately will, in many cases, look reasonably similar to where your existing team resources have done best in the particular segments of the market. So that's how a co-location and cloud services provider can attract the right channel partners. Okay, what do we have up next? Next question. How does a high-performance data center cabling solutions company improve its lead generation? How does a high-performance cabling company, high-performance data center cabling solutions company improve its lead generation? That is a fantastic question. And the first place that I'd start with that is to recognize that different go-to-market professionals have very different ways of understanding what a lead is and what lead generation actually is. From a marketer's perspective, a lead could be any particular known contact that potentially fits your ideal client profile that may or may not have visited with your company or may not have visited your company's website. Like, for example, from a marketer's perspective, someone that visited a booth at a conference that you exhibited at and that traded their badge scan for a t-shirt or whatever, or door prize. In theory, that's a lead, right? Is it a qualified lead? Does it align with your ideal client profile? Do they have any intention of ever engaging with your company or learning from your company or speaking with a salesperson? That's an entirely different concept, but in theory, that's a lead. Buying a list of prospects or scraping a list of prospects that you think may align with your ideal client profile. Yeah, in theory, they're leads. Are they showing any interest whatsoever in your topic, your category, talking with your sales team? Again, entirely different proposition. Another concept of a lead is someone that visits your website and fills out a form on your website page. And depending on the nature of that offer, depending on what's offered on that landing page, they may have very different intentions. Like, for example, someone could visit your website and subscribe to a newsletter. And based on the description of your newsletter topic and the context at which they arrived at that particular landing page, that tells you like, okay, they're interested in hearing from us on a regular basis about that topic. A ebook or downloadable report or a planning guide or a quiz or something like that. Pretty similar context. There's a promise in the headline of that landing page for a particular person, and they have enough perceived value. They're anticipating enough value that they're essentially willing to trade their business card information for what's available on the other side of the landing page. So in theory, if that person is from a named account, if their demographics align with what you think is your ideal client profile, then you have a person who's showing some topical interest that may be, to a certain degree, showing some early signs of qualification. Does that mean they're ready to go to sales for a very high value account? Maybe you pass to sales early, but for most accounts, they probably need some nurturing until they're showing some intent, some signs of interest in talking to a human from your company. How do we accelerate to that intent? Typically, you're using lead nurturing. Two most common kinds of lead nurturing in the data center ecosystem would be like email marketing, like email nurturing sequences, email newsletter, and events, especially educational focused events like webinars, breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, symposias, where again, you have the opportunity to educate and build trust. And email marketing, email newsletters do education and trust building, educational events do education and trust building. And that can do wonders to taking a early stage lead and accelerating them to the point that they're showing enough intent to be considered what a salesperson would look at as a lead. A known contact from a known company that fits your ideal client profile, that's gotten some education from your company about this particular topic, and they've now raised their hand and say, oh yeah, actually we are really interested in cybersecurity best practices or improving our PUE or being able to get alternative energy to power a data center project we're working on or whatever. Yeah, I'm super interested in a free consultation with an expert from your company. So there's all different ways of looking at what a lead is, but the first place is when it comes to, regardless of whether you do cabling or power or energy or commissioning or construction or whatever you're doing in the data center industry, it's sitting your team down, your go-to-market team down, and getting clear about what a lead is and what a lead is not. Because without that, you're going to have a hard time working together and collaborating. And without that, that's a lot of where the friction starts. That's a lot of where the blame game starts. Teams that grow well, that collaborate well together, get on the same page about who their ideal client is and about what the definition of a lead looks like and when that lead should be passed to sales versus when that lead should continue to get nurturing. And it usually, we talk about the idea of a quadrant where in a perfect world, your account executives, your sales development reps want to spend nearly all of their time talking to people with high interest and high fit, meaning they're highly interested in your area, they're highly interested in talking to someone from your company, and they fit perfectly or nearly perfectly within your ideal client profile. Those are the obvious ones that should go immediately to sales that sales will be really excited about talking to. At the other extreme, there's people that will fill out forms on your website or stop by your booth or some other kind of context, and they're showing very little interest. Maybe they just wanted the t-shirt. Or they didn't even give you accurate information. They falsified something on a lead gen form. That happens all the time. So they're showing low interest and they're low fit. They don't fit your ideal client profile. So best case scenario, maybe that's get some group resources and get nurtured. High fits, but low interest, they need some nurturing. They could be from a perfect account. but they don't want to talk to you. And if you push too hard to try to talk to them before they're ready, you can send them running for the hills. And every once in a while, there's people that are not a good fit, but showing high interest. And in that particular case, you go into order taker mode. So again, this is a typical 4-quadrant way of looking at this. This is nothing new. It's been around for the better part of a decade. But these are the kinds of conversations that you should be having internally about getting on the same page about what a lead is versus what a lead is not. For a cabling company, which is kind of a first cousin like cabling, connectivity, intersecting a little bit with telecommunications and the technology part of the data center ecosystem, the name of the game for the most part is to have a strong understanding of who your ideal clients are at the account level. Like, where are they located? In other words, when it comes to cabling, because are you shipping cabling? Are you shipping fiber? Or are you the one who actually goes and does the fiber and the copper poles to do the physical installation in the facility and wiring up the patch panels and everything? And depending on whether you're doing installation versus just the manufacturer, that has big implications as to how broad or how narrow the geographic part of your ideal client profile is. So get clear about that depending on your business model. Maybe you're a manufacturer and the actual installation and the specking, scoping out. The site surveys get done by a channel partner. Again, figure that part out, get it in your ideal client profile as the kind of the groundwork and the foundation for successful lead generation. Figure out how big or small these companies should be historically, where you won best. How big do they need to be to afford your minimums? At what point do they get so large that they may outgrow you and they may be looking for things that you just can't provide right now as a company? And are there certain industries that you've done better at than others? This will fuel building a target account list, and that target account list can be used to put structure around your outbound lead generation campaigns and put some structure around ads. I'm particularly partial to using LinkedIn. I think it's a fantastic platform for reaching these kinds of buyer personas, but there's other ways to do this, most of which need a significantly larger budget to be able to do well on this. But at the end of the day, what it's all about is really understanding who the companies we're targeting, and then within those companies, we're the individuals that we need to build these relationships with. When it comes to cabling solutions, it could be in a smaller company, it could be a data center manager. In a larger company, you'll tend to see more granular roles with people that are involved as like cabling techs and infrastructure engineers and system engineers. It's going to, again, vary tremendously based on how big or how small the company is, whether they wear a lot of hats or they're a lot more specialized roles. And the nature of where you can sell into will depend a lot on how big or small what companies you've historically won best with. Or you tend to do well with, for example, smaller end user sites or smaller colocation operators where you're selling directly to someone that's more mid-level? Or do you tend to do really well because your minimums are so high with Fortune 1000 companies where they're huge deals, it's a longer sales cycle, there's a lot more requirements, and as a result, you end up with a lot more different kinds of stakeholders, a longer sales cycle, and you need a much more sophisticated sales and onboarding and account management process for your cabling solutions. But yeah, it's at the end of the day, having a lot of clarity as to the companies you're targeting and who are the individual people in the companies and what do they care most about. That's where I'd encourage you to spend some serious thought if you want to get out of the vendor box and stop having to chase being the lowest price anymore all the time, where you can actually win on expertise and win on value, not based on who's the cheapest. And in order to get out of that vendor box, your prospects, your future clients need to see your client-facing team members more as experts, more as trusted advisors, more as consultants, and less by their traditional sales transaction-focused job titles. Does that mean you should immediately go into email signatures and LinkedIn profiles and business cards and upgrade and upskill the job title? Perhaps that's part of it. But in a lot of companies, these are big culture changes. It changes the nature of who you hire. It changes the nature of how much upskilling and reskilling your company invests in. It changes the nature as to how your teams are structured. It for sure should be shifting resources away from events that are just about branding and vanity metrics and towards events that are a lot more about putting you in a place where you can, putting your company in a place, putting your client-facing team members in a place where they can educate and build trust. That education and building trust is a really, really, really big deal to getting you out of the vendor box and helping you stay out of the vendor box. Because when you're in a position where you're running these educational events, you will be putting yourself in a position where it's a very natural ask to say, gee, when it comes to cabling solutions, it takes a team. It's a team effort. It takes a village. We typically have stakeholders that get a lot of value from these kind of events that come from infrastructure, engineering, operations, support, low voltage, whatever it is that fits with your category. So with that in mind, who else should be joining us for this webinar? Who else should be joining us for these lunch and learns? And when you start to see the registration list and the attendee list, you're like, cool, there's clusters of multiple people from the same company showing up. That's where the dominoes start to fall on you driving alignment across multiple stakeholders in that particular company. And when you see each time that you invite them to another event, and there's more and more people coming to that event, and at one point, one of them takes you aside and says, hey, there's like 6 of us here from our company. Why don't you just come on site and present this at our company meeting next month, and you can get in front of our entire department of 45 people. What do you think? You're like, that would be awesome. We'll bring the bagels too. We're happy to present this exact same content to your entire IT organization, whatever works best for you. So it's a way of driving alignment. Teams that learn together grow together. It's a way of proactively not only keeping you on the short list throughout the full, getting you on the short list and keeping you on the short list. It's a way of proactively being able to drive alignment. It's a way of being able to frame the criteria in a way that stacks the decks in the favor of your company at a time where it's still early enough in the journey where they're open to your insights and advice and best practices on how they should look at the different options that are in front of them for different approaches to cabling, where they're open to getting introduced to other people in similar companies and similar job roles who've been through this and explain the process that they went through, kind of like live case study interviews. But with all of this, if you're looking to improve lead generation, think a lot less about transaction-focused lead generation and think a lot more about educating and building trust in a place where the people that are attending come to the event with the mindset that they're going to learn, and they leave the event with like a jaw-dropping moment of like, I had no idea. We thought we knew what we were talking about with this, but wow, what an eye-opener to see how other people in similar job roles and similar kinds of companies have navigated this. And the issue that really matter, like our thinking, we were thinking about this like, we haven't upgraded our thinking in like the past 5 or 10 years. Now we truly understand what's going on. We're so glad that we got introduced to these experts. And for sure, when it comes to choosing the right data center cabling company to work with, we now know exactly who to go to because we know the perfect people, we know the perfect support, we know the perfect resources that we're going to want to build our cabling and connectivity infrastructure investments around. So that's how a high performance data center cabling solutions company can improve its lead generation. Arrive early, arrive often, educate, and build trust. That brings us to our final question for this week's show. If you've been getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word, share the love, and if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments wherever you like to watch. So what do we have up next? What is our final question for this week? Is all about the financial and investment side, the capital markets side of data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And the question is, how does a data center investment and financial advisory firm attract tenants? How does a data center investment and financial advisory firm attract tenants? That's a really interesting question because most of the time when I come across investors and financial advisors to data center investors, they a lot of times don't want to get involved in the nitty-gritty of leasing out the space. Most of the time they want to hand this out to an operator or they want to hand it out to a real estate firm. But you do every once in a while see companies that want to be truly vertically integrated, or they take a much more hands-on approach to their portfolio companies that are building and operating these data centers and attracting tenants. So at the end of the day, for an investment and financial advisory company that wants to attract tenants, for doing this in today's hyper-competitive marketplace, depending on your size, the broader your target market is, the broader your addressable market is, the broader your ideal client profile is, the bigger the resources that you need to be able to do this successfully. In other words, like if you have the luxury of building go-to-market and a sales and marketing playbook with the resources of like Equinix or Digital Realty or NTT Global Data Centers or something like that behind you, you have the luxury of being able to go broad. But even So most of the enterprise, most of the mid-market, large global operators in this space, they're starting to segment their marketing and sales, especially their sales and account management teams, by both deal size and by vertical. In other words, they're recognizing that it's a different skill set to sell low-cost co-location that kind of butts up against the upper end of the range of web hosting and self-service cloud with large co-location deals that are almost big enough that they'd be considered like wholesale size deals. And this is a lot of times too where data center investors or investment firms come to us and they're looking for like an anchor tenant, which is like the, I guess, the opposite, the antonym of like retail co-location, right? So generally, the bigger your company is, the less you need to be that granular because you're attracting a lot of people based on the brand name alone. The smaller your company is, the more I would encourage you to get really dialed into where you've won best, historically where you've done best. Now, for a brand new data center facility and a brand new data center operator, you're not necessarily going to have logos on your website and testimonials and reviews and case studies because this is a brand new facility. If you do, if you're a couple of years into it, then the answer is pretty straightforward. Look at where you've been most successful, the clients have been happiest, the most profitable clients, the most profitable tenants, and lather, rinse, repeat. If you're brand new and you don't have that yet, then you're typically looking to your team, your founding team, and looking where they've been most successful in the past, where they have pre-existing relationships, where they have deep institutional knowledge. That'll give you a pretty good idea of where to start. When I see the word tenants as well, that also concerns me a little bit because there's really two different ways of thinking about co-location. There's two different ways of thinking about hyperscale. There's a very real estate focused approach where tenants and leasing are the terminology that you're going to tend to use. And then there's more of an IT services approach where you tend to think of your clients as opposed to tenants. And another way to potentially look at this is when you're looking at selling like retail co-location, is it like co-working for servers, or are you operating more like a managed service provider that provides a lot of amenities, a lot of IT services, where you're taking care of just about anything and everything that that particular client could need in your data center to be successful with their infrastructure and power and cooling and potentially even their security needs, where you're offering a lot of services that sometimes could be done by a managed service provider if they don't have those resources internally, or would be done by their own internal IT staff. But if none of those are available, your internal team could potentially provide those at an extra cost. That's where we see, in a lot of cases, smaller co-location operators being really successful by, instead of scaling based on number of locations and number of capital, they're getting a bigger share of wallet. They're getting a bigger share of budget by providing more comprehensive services to their co-location clients, basically providing a lot of IT services. So in those particular contexts, you probably are calling clients, right? Relationship-oriented clients the same way like a managed service provider, IT consulting firm would have clients, whereas a real estate-focused data center operator would have tenants. So again, it really depends on where you're coming from your board of directors, your objectives, your capital, how you're positioning the facility, how broad you are, like horizontal versus vertically, and niche focused, what your competitive advantages are, and thinking about how you're going to stand out in a crowded marketplace. You may, and depending on where you're located, you may have the luxury where none of this matters and you have cost-effective power in a location where basically no power is available. And you're in what most people would consider a seller's market, where you don't need to put a lot of thought into this. And it's fairly straightforward to go get your big anchor tenants. But if you're in a place where you actually have to compete for business and win against other data center operators in your space, then yeah, you need to think about like what a reasonable go-to-market looks like, what your ideal client profile is going to look like for where these clients are located, how big or small they are, employee headcount wise, what industries they tend to be located in, what industries are not a good fit because they're going to look for compliance or accreditation or certifications that you just simply don't have at this stage. And then within these companies, who are the stakeholders that you want to build deep relationships with, who could be a great fit. And depending on how big or how small your company is, how big or how small their company is, it drives how granular the segmentation needs to be, how granular this kinds of stakeholders are. In other words, if you're selling to small to mid-sized businesses where the typical IT department you're selling into is 5 people, it doesn't matter whether your foot in the door is with the junior person or with the VP of IT or the CTO. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows who's responsible for infrastructure. Everyone knows who's responsible for who would make a decision on colocation. If you're selling to an enterprise where there's 500 or 5,000 people in an IT organization or more, then yeah, you need to get a lot more specific on the personas, on the job titles. But at the end of the day, in order for us to get in early and often and to provide value, we need to understand what's going on in their world, what they care most about, what their biggest professional goals are, what their biggest frustrations are that are directly or indirectly related to someone making a significant considered purchase decision around where they're going to place their servers, where they're going to place their IT infrastructure in the coming weeks and in the coming months. And regardless of whether you're a data center operator, a managed service provider who happens to have their own data center, or a cloud services provider, or you're coming at this from the perspective of being a data center investor or financial advisor to data center operators or data center investors, at the end of the day, everyone's looking for the same thing. They're looking for revenue. They're looking for stable, profitable revenue, stable, profitable clients, and finding a really good match between your power, cooling, and telecommunications of space that you have available and what the clients actually need. So the clients are happy, so they stay, so they land and expand, and you continue to have a successful, fully leased out, profitable data center facility or set of facilities that drive the core business. But again, it's relatively rare for a data center investor or data center financial advisor to get that deeply involved in building and executing and refining a go-to-market or sales and marketing or lead gen strategy. That's usually done more with operators, and in some cases, the operators may delegate, hopefully not subjugate, more delegate to channel partners to do a lot of that for them, or agencies to potentially do that for them, depending on their resources and depending on how much control they want to have versus how much control they're willing to give up for speed and for some other. There's pros and cons with all of this, but at the end of the day, for a data center investor and financial advisory firm that looks to attract tenants, get a lot more specific about who these tenants are, how big or how small their companies are, how much space they're going to take. Most of the time, data center investors tend to over-index on what I call logo hires, meaning that they want people that are coming from really, really big brands within the company. So in other words, like even though you may have a 10,000 square foot single location data center operator, they want to bring in the big guns. They want to bring in someone that's already done this for DLR or Equinix or CBRE or JLL or something like that. And the challenge with doing that is finding people that have the experience of both working for a big logo brand and have done these things with small companies in the past, because the amount of resourcefulness, the amount of requirements and demand gen experiments and how hands-on you need to be in a small company with very limited resources compared to a huge company with an enormous brand is a very, very different context, regardless of whether you're talking about SaaS or infrastructure or facilities or construction or real estate. So yeah, that's probably one of the bigger cautionary notes, is just be really careful that if your board of directors, if your investors is really enamored with hiring for logos, make sure that the people with that logo experience have also had experience working for small startup-y kind of environments, scrappy environments, like sub 50 employees or something like that, if that's your context, where they've had to be that resourceful and kind of entrepreneurial, and a lot of their approach to making things happen without the benefit of a huge, well-known global brand behind them. So those are my recommendations on considerations to think about for how a data center investment and financial advisory firm can attract tenants if they actually are getting involved in the nitty gritty and rolling up their sleeves of go-to-market and sales and marketing strategy, which again does happen from time to time, but more than likely in larger scenarios, this is pushed down to more of an operator type of team. And then they go and they flesh out hiring a CRO, a director of sales, a marketing director, whatever they feel they need to be able to fill up the data center cost efficiently with the right kind of tenants. So that's how I would approach how a data center investment and financial advisory firm can attract tenants. And that was our final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you got good value from this week's show, make sure that you hit the like button. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events, educational resources like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. And that way you'll get notified in your email inbox each Sunday about upcoming educational events like this. And if you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a connect request. Just mention that you were watching or attended the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, and I'd be happy to be connected with you on LinkedIn. I'm Joshua Feinberg, Feinberg, from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We're so glad that you joined us for this week's show, and we look forward to seeing you back again next time when we'll be tackling 6 more of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about all over the data center ecosystem, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of the week. And we wish you and your team tremendous success.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.